when we got together and decided as the time that we were going to do a record. And of course Prince said, no, you can't use the name.
Well, understand why. See how it's done.
In the early 80s, Minneapolis wasn't just birthing a sound, it was birthing an empire. And at the center was Prince. He didn't just make music, he built entire worlds, and anyone who stepped inside had to play by his rules. The Time was supposed to be his fun side project, a slick, funky crew dripping with charisma, led by Morris Day's larger-than-life persona. To the crowd, they looked untouchable, sharp suits, sharper grooves, swagger for days, but behind the curtain it was all Prince's design.
I can't use The Time to record, but he can't stop me from using The Time as a touring name. So legally there was nothing he could do, so I just wonder if he might have tried to shut me down.
He wrote the songs, played the instruments, and pulled every string, while Morris and the band performed like stars trapped inside his shadow. The twist? On stage, The Time became a monster of their own, so good they sometimes stole the spotlight from the man who created them. That tension, control versus freedom, genius versus ego, would define their legacy and eventually tear them apart. Prince didn't just build bands, he built entire universes where he ran the show. And when it came to The Time, he wasn't just a mastermind, he was basically pulling every string. On the surface, they looked like the coolest funk crew around, all swagger and flash, but in the studio, that was Prince's playground. He wrote the tracks, played most of the instruments, produced everything under a fake name, and even had Morris Day sing over his own demo vocals, like he was tracing a coloring book. The group only existed because Prince wanted an outlet for the funky, party-heavy stuff he didn't want under his own name. To fans, The Time looked independent and untouchable. Behind the curtain, they were locked into Prince's world, Morris Day especially, who often said he felt like he was just following orders. But here's the twist. Prince created his own competition. Live, The Time couldn't be tamed. Morris Day's showmanship, Jerome holding the mirror mid-song, the band dripping with charisma. They had crowds eating out of their hands. Sometimes they even stole the spotlight from Prince himself, which only made tensions messier. By the time Purple Rain rolled around, that dynamic was out in the open. On screen, Morris played Prince's flashy rival, but that rivalry wasn't just acting, it mirrored the backstage tug of war.
Well, understand why. See how it's done.
Prince had designed this band to push him, and they did. The irony? They became so good at being larger than life that they sometimes outshined the guy who built them.
Back in the day, he didn't want us to produce other groups, and we actually produced the SOS.
By the mid-80s, that setup started showing cracks. The first real break came with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. They weren't just keyboard players keeping the groove alive, they were already dreaming bigger, itching to put their own stamp on music outside Prince's bubble. So while still in the band, they slipped away to Atlanta to cook something up with the SOS band. What was supposed to be just another side hustle turned into a career-defining moment. Locked in the studio, they pieced together Just Be Good to Me, a slow-burning groove that would change everything, but fate played its hand. A snowstorm hit, their flight got canceled, and instead of making it back in time for a gig in San Antonio, they were grounded. The Time walked on stage 2 men short. Prince found out, and it was game over. In his world, you didn't miss a show. And you definitely didn't sneak off to build someone else's sound while wearing his jersey. The punishment was fast and final. Jam and Lewis were out.
Prince called them in for a meeting. I mean, I had no idea what he had in his mind. So me and Jesse Johnson and Prince sitting in the studio, and Terry and Jimmy come in, and you guys are fired.
The irony was sharp. The very track that cost them their spots turned into a smash, officially launching them as hitmakers. From there, Jam and Lewis didn't just survive, they took over. Their fingerprints ended up all over pop and R&B, helping define Janet Jackson's breakout, reshaping radio, and proving they weren't just sidemen in Prince's orbit. They became legends in their own right, arguably more influential in the long run than anyone else from that Minneapolis crew. For The Time, the fallout was deeper than just losing 2 players. It showed how fragile the whole arrangement really was. Prince had built the band to be his creation, his mirror, his sparring partner. But the musicians inside it weren't built to live as someone's shadow forever. Jam and Lewis walking away made the split plain. Prince wanted obedience, they wanted freedom, and once that line got drawn, The Time was never the same. Once Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were out, the spotlight shifted even harder onto Morris Day. He was already the showman, but now he became the face, the centerpiece, the one audiences couldn't look away from. On stage, he was untouchable, mirror in hand, every step and smirk designed to scream confidence. But off stage, that same persona started to eat him alive. The late arrivals weren't just rock star behavior anymore, they were symptoms. Arguments with the band got uglier, and the drugs made everything worse. There was even that infamous story of him stumbling barefoot through a Minnesota snowstorm, showing up at Prince's house just looking for a way to hustle enough money for his next fix. Money didn't help either. The group was packing out arenas, but the paychecks told a different story. Members quietly complained about being underpaid, and the feeling of being trapped under Prince's shadow only grew heavier. They weren't just a band anymore, they were Prince's side project, forever tethered to his control, his decisions, his contracts. Even when they were winning, it never felt like freedom. Then came Purple Rain. To the world, Morris Day and the Time looked unstoppable, funny, stylish, magnetic. They nearly stole the movie with their flamboyant foil routine against Prince's brooding lead. But behind the curtain, the band was crumbling. Jam and Lewis were gone, infighting was constant, and Morris himself was slipping deeper into addiction and ego. Prince still showcased them on film, but he also kept the reins tight, reminding everyone who really ran the machine. The whispers never went away. Fans speculated for years. Was there a real rift between Morris and Prince? Was the Time actually their own thing, or just Prince in disguise? Morris eventually answered those questions himself. In interviews and in his memoir, he admitted the truth. Prince controlled everything. Songs were written, recorded, and finished before he even stepped to the mic. His job was to copy what Prince had already laid down. To the outside world, he looked like the mastermind. Inside, he felt like a prop. Even the food fight that fans remembered as a funny Prince versus the Time moment hit differently from Morris's side. To him, it wasn't just goofing around, it was disrespect. A reminder that their rivalry was never equal. He was the star of someone else's show. That tension never fully healed. Prince pulled them back in when it suited him and pushed them away when it didn't. Tours got cut, records got shelved, money got messy. For Morris, the Time was always both gift and curse, his biggest stage, but also a cage. When Prince passed in 2016, Morris's grief was complicated. He wasn't just losing an old friend or bandmate, he was losing the man who had shaped, defined, and boxed him in all at once. And what stung even more was the irony. Prince had always scolded Morris for his drug use, yet in the end, it was fentanyl that claimed him. Morris said later he wished someone had reached out, that maybe he could have helped. But that chapter closed without resolution, leaving behind a legacy of brilliance tangled in control, ego, and what-ifs. But funk never dies, and neither did the Time's pull.
When we got together and decided as the Time that we were going to do a record. And of course, Prince said, no, you can't use the name.
By the time the 90s rolled around, the Time's legacy was already a patchwork of splits, grudges, and near misses. But funk has a funny way of pulling people back together. In 1990, all 7 originals linked up again for Graffiti Bridge and Drop Pandemonium, complete with the slick, single jerk out. For a second, it felt like the old magic had returned, the strut, the choreographed cool, the unapologetic funk swagger. But that spark didn't last. The same egos and unresolved beef that tore them apart before bubbled back up, and just like that, the reunion collapsed. Morris wasn't ready to let it all die though. By the mid-1990s, he dusted off the brand as Morris Day and the Time. This wasn't the same brotherhood fans had fallen in love with. New faces like Torrey Ruffin, Chance Howard, and Ricky Freeze Smith filled in the gaps. But the crowd still showed up. Cameos in movies like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back kept them visible, and the tours reminded everyone that nostalgia for the Time was real. For Morris, it was also about staking his claim. He may not have owned the music, but he could at least own the persona. But the Time's curse was always instability. In 2011, the original lineup tried again, this time under a new alias, the Original 7. The name change wasn't just marketing, it was a way to dodge the legal minefield around the Time. Yet new branding couldn't erase old problems. Creative clashes and money disputes sunk the momentum almost instantly. By the end of that same year, Jesse Johnson was gone, venting his frustration publicly on Facebook. He laid it out plain. He was hemorrhaging money on travel, gear, and outfits with nothing coming back. For fans, it was a gut punch. Decades in the game, and they were still fighting over pay, still chasing stability that never came. Then came 2016. Prince's sudden death was a cultural earthquake, and for Morris it was personal. A complicated loss wrapped in love, resentment, and unfinished business, but it also unleashed a new fight. Who actually owned the time? In 2022, Morris dropped a bombshell that the Prince estate had told him he could no longer perform as Morris Day in the Time. To him, it felt like having his identity stripped away after 40 years of carrying it. Fans rallied behind him, angry that the man who embodied the role for decades was suddenly being told he didn't own it. The estate saw it differently. They pointed back to paperwork from 1982, where Prince's company locked down full rights to the name. By their reading, Morris had no claim unless he cut a licensing deal. What felt like erasure to Morris was, to them, business as usual. And that's the tragedy of the time. Even 40 years later, they were still battling the same ghosts. They had the style, the hits, the movie moments, but never the freedom. Not the music, not the money, not even the name. Prince gave them life, but he also kept them tethered to him long after he was gone.